You know, high society is all about wearing a mask. The perfect hostess, the brilliant noblewoman, the doctor you trust with your life. But what happens when behind some of those masks, there's a darkness that's almost impossible to comprehend? Well, that's what we're going to do. We're going to peel back the public facades of four of history's most infamous women to try and understand the monsters that were lurking just beneath the surface.
So, what is it? What turns a woman into a monster? That's the big question here, right? And it is not a simple one. Was it power, obsession, something else entirely? We're about to dive into the chilling stories of four women who used their status and their charm as weapons, leaving an absolute trail of death and horror behind them.
First up, meet Countess Elizabeth Báthory. Now we're talking the turn of the 17th century, and she wasn't just any noble. She was the king's cousin, a diplomat who spoke 3 languages and was widely considered the most beautiful woman in the entire realm. Her castles literally formed a line between empires, but by night, a very different creature emerged, the Blood Countess. Okay, now let's jump forward to 1930s Bucharest and meet Vera Renzi. She was the daughter of a well-off family, you know the type, pretty, intelligent, super sophisticated. Men were just drawn to her charm and her wealth. But under all that allure was, as one profiler so perfectly put it, one heck of an efficient serial killer.
Head over to 1830s New Orleans, and if you were anybody, I mean anybody, you were going to parties at Madame Delphine LaLaurie's mansion on Royal Street. She was married to a famous surgeon, and she entertained the absolute cream of the crop. Her home was this symbol of high society, right up until a fire revealed it was actually a house of horrors, a revelation that would send shockwaves across the entire nation.
And finally, there's Dr. Linda Hazard. Seriously, with a name that perfect, you just couldn't make it up. In the early 1900s, she was a superstar, a really charismatic leader who promised miracle cures to the sick and the wealthy. Her power of conviction, it was just intoxicating. People flocked to her. They believed every single word she said, a belief that would, tragically, end up costing them their lives.
So we've got a countess, a lover, a socialite, and a doctor. On the surface, I mean, they couldn't be more different. But they all shared one thing, a common, deadly trait. Let's dig into the twisted motives that really fueled their cruelty.
And what's so fascinating here is that you can trace each woman's crimes back to a single, really powerful driver. For Báthory, it was this terrifying obsession with her own youth and beauty. For Renzi, it was a possessive, all-consuming need for love. LaLaurie, she was driven by a thirst for sadistic power. And Hazard was fueled by a delusional belief in her own deadly cure.
600. Just let that number sink in. That is the almost unbelievable number of servants Elizabeth Báthory is thought to have murdered. According to one FBI profiler, even if she only killed 10% of that number, 60 people, that still makes her one of the most prolific serial killers in all of history. Accounts from the time describe systematic torture, just horrible beatings, burning, mutilation, and starving her victims to death. The legend that grew out of all this horror is that it all started when a servant's blood splashed on her skin, and she became convinced it made her look young.
And from one shocking number to the next, 35. That's how many airtight zinc coffins the police discovered in Vera Renzi's basement. And inside every single one, a former lover. She wasn't just killing them, she was collecting them. She was creating what one expert called a museum of death of her own design. They were her trophies.
After that fire in 1834 exposed what was happening in Delphine LaLaurie's torture attic, a local newspaper wrote this. I mean, even firemen, guys who were used to seeing death, reportedly fell to their knees just vomiting at the scene. The horror was so deep, so profound that, as the paper put it, language is powerless and inadequate to give a proper conception of the horror.
Okay, so we've seen the why behind their crimes. Now, let's get into the how. Because each of these women developed a chillingly distinct and very systematic playbook for murder.
Vera Renzi's method was like this cold, calculated ritual. First, she'd select a married man. Then, she'd lure him in with all her sophistication. Next, she'd serve him one last dinner, seasoned with arsenic. And finally came preservation and collection. You see, this wasn't chaotic violence, it was a controlled process, designed for one reason, to make sure her lovers would never, ever leave her.
LaLaurie's sadism, though, was way more chaotic, way more brutal. When rescuers finally broke down a locked attic door during that fire, they found a scene of just pure horror. Enslaved people were chained up, they were mutilated, some were even suspended by their necks with their limbs stretched and torn.
This wasn't about control like it was for Renzi. This was about inflicting the absolute maximum amount of pain possible. Dr. Hazard's method was so deceptively simple. She just starved her patients. She did it under the guise of a medical cure, giving them only 2 small glasses of diluted broth a day. But the ultimate act of betrayal? That came after they died, sometimes weighing as little as 50 pounds. Because she was also the local coroner, she would sign their death certificates herself, listing fake causes of death to cover her tracks.
So, we've seen what they did and how they did it. But can modern psychology actually give us a window into what was going on in their minds? Let's take a look at some psychological profiles that might just explain these monstrous acts.
Delusion. This fits Linda Hazard absolutely perfectly. I mean, she believed so fiercely in her starvation care that in the end, when she got sick, she actually used it on herself and died. And you could really say the same thing for Elizabeth Báthory. To believe that bathing in the blood of young women could actually preserve your beauty, that is a powerful, grotesque delusion, completely unmoored from reality.
And then you have sadism. Honestly, this is the only word that truly captures what Delphine LaLaurie did. While some people have speculated about twisted medical experiments or some kind of revenge, the sheer extremity of the torture, it really only points to one thing. She got pleasure from inflicting unimaginable pain on other people.
So where does this kind of darkness even come from? Well, modern FBI profiling offers a few clues. It suggests that for a lot of killers, the roots are planted in childhood trauma or abuse. This can lead to murder fantasies starting in their early teens. They act out these obsessions thinking, hoping it will bring them some kind of relief. But it never does. The act never lives up to the fantasy, and that creates a deadly repeating cycle of violence, a cycle you can clearly see in the patterns of women like Renzi and Báthory.
You know, these crimes aren't just contained in dusty history books. They leave a legacy, a dark echo that resonates for centuries, impacting families and communities in ways we can still see, even today.
This is Dennis Báthory Kitts. He's a modern American composer who was haunted by an ancestor who died 400 years ago. He is so consumed with trying to understand Elizabeth Báthory's evil that he's composed an entire opera about her. He's even traveled to her castle in Slovakia, just trying to make sense of a horror that has cascaded down through his family for centuries.
And in this really powerful gesture, Dennis held a reconciliation meal in Choctaw, the very town where many of his ancestors' victims lived. With these words, he tried to bring a moment of peace and healing to a wound that has stayed open for 400 years. A descendant trying to atone for the sins of the Blood Countess.
So this brings us all the way back to our first question. I know these stories are extreme, but they force us to confront some really uncomfortable truths about obsession and power and cruelty. So I'll just leave you with this. What do these glimpses into humanity's darkest corners really teach us about the fine line between good and evil that might just exist inside us all?